To redemption. The city never slept. Luxury cars glided through crowded streets while towering glass buildings reflected the morning sun. At the very top of one of those towers sat Alexander Sterling, a 30-year-old billionaire. He had inherited his family's fortune and now led one of the largest companies in the country. His life looked perfect. He owned mansions, private jets, expensive watches, and more money than he could spend in a lifetime. People admired him, newspapers praised him, and business rivals feared him. Yet every night when the lights went out and silence filled his mansion, he felt an emptiness he could never explain. Growing up, Alexander's parents had taught him that success was everything. They believed money solved every problem. They never spoke about God, prayer, or church. Alexander had never opened a Bible. In fact, he didn't even know what Christianity was. One Monday morning, Alexander visited a neighborhood where his company planned to build a new community center. While walking through the streets, he noticed a young woman helping an elderly man carry groceries. She wore simple clothes and carried a worn handbag. After helping the man, she smiled warmly and hurried toward the bus stop. Something about her stood out. The next day he returned, and the next. Finally, he introduced himself. "My name is Alexander." She smiled. "I'm Grace." Grace worked an ordinary 8-to-5 office job. Her paycheck barely covered rent, food, and the medicine her widowed mother needed. Every Sunday she faithfully attended church, sang in the choir, and volunteered with the children's ministry. Despite her struggles, she radiated peace. As the weeks passed, Alexander found excuses to see her. They talked over coffee. They walked through the city park. They laughed together. One afternoon, while sitting beneath an old oak tree, Alexander asked the question that had been lingering in his mind. "Grace, you always talk about God. Who is he?" Grace looked surprised. "You've never heard about him?" Alexander shook his head. "I've heard people mention his name, but I don't know who Jesus is." Grace stared quietly, realizing that the man who possessed everything had never heard the greatest story ever told. She opened the small Bible she carried in her handbag. Patiently, she explained how God created humanity out of love, how sin separated people from him, and how Jesus Christ came into the world to die on the cross and rise again so that anyone who believes in him can receive forgiveness and eternal life. Alexander listened without interrupting. For the first time in his life, money wasn't the answer. Hope was. Grace invited him to church. He hesitated but agreed. The music was simple. The people were ordinary. No one cared that he was rich. They welcomed him as if he were family. The pastor preached from the Gospel of John about God's love for the world. Alexander felt something stirring deep inside him. Week after week he kept coming back. He read the Bible every night. The words challenged him. They comforted him. They changed him. Then tragedy struck. Alexander's father suffered a sudden heart attack and passed away. For the first time, Alexander realized wealth could not stop death. The mansion felt colder than ever. His expensive possessions brought no comfort. Broken and overwhelmed, he picked up the Bible Grace had given him. He fell to his knees beside his bed. With tears streaming down his face, he whispered, "Jesus, if you are real, I need you. Forgive me. Change me. I give my life to you." Peace filled the room, not the kind money could buy, the kind only God could give. From that day forward, Alexander was no longer the same man. He became generous without seeking recognition. He treated every employee with dignity. He established scholarships for struggling students, built shelters for families in need, and funded churches in communities where the gospel had never been preached. His greatest joy was no longer making money. It was serving Christ. Grace watched the transformation with gratitude. She knew she hadn't changed Alexander. God had. One evening, Alexander took Grace back to the park where they had first talked about faith. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he knelt on one knee. "Grace," he said softly, "before I met you, I thought money was life's greatest treasure. You introduced me to Jesus, and he changed everything. "Will you marry me?" With tears of joy, Grace answered, "Yes." Their wedding was beautiful, not because it was extravagant, but because it centered on Christ. Friends, family, and members of their church gathered to celebrate God's faithfulness. Years passed. God blessed them with children. Their home echoed with laughter, bedtime prayers, worship songs, and stories from the Bible. Every evening, Alexander gathered his family together to pray. One night, his young son asked, "Dad, were you always a Christian?" Alexander smiled and gently shook his head. "No, son, I was born into great wealth, but my heart was empty. Your mother introduced me to Jesus, and he became the greatest gift I have ever received." Grace reached for his hand. They smiled at one another, remembering the journey God had written for them. The final scene, Alexander stands before a crowd, holding the same Bible Grace had once opened for him. He says, "I spent years searching for happiness in wealth, but true life began the day I met Jesus Christ. If you feel empty today, know that his love is for you too."